My name is Epen. I'm an iOS engineer at GoNetZero. Thank you, Praka, for the introduction, and thank you, Soup, for sponsoring the venue. So Praka introduced GoNetZero briefly earlier, but for those of you who are not familiar with GoNetZero, we are the leading AI digital paper app with millions of users worldwide. And it was started in 2011 by our CEO, Stephen Chan, as an improvement for physical paper notes. And now GoNetZero is pioneering generative AI for digital handwriting in the productivity workspace. And now I'm here to talk about building robust payment solutions for 100 plus markets. So a brief introduction about myself. I graduated with Bachelor's of Computer Science in 2019, so I have been an iOS developer for 5 years now, and I have been with GoNetZero for almost 2 years, and now I'm working with GoNetZero's marketplace and monetization team, which for those of you who are not familiar with GoNetZero, in GoNetZero we sell templates like student planners or just yearly planners, and you can buy and import them to your GoNetZero file. So these are the topics that I will be talking about today. The first one is types of in-app purchases from App Store and how they work. And later on, I want to highlight these two types of purchases, which are non-consumables and consumables. And the latest one is I want to share my experience and challenges and learnings with the development of payment model for GoNetZero's marketplace. So first is types of in-app purchases. So these are the 4 types of in-app purchases provided by Apple. The first one is consumables. Just a brief summary for each of them. Consumables can be purchased multiple times if you play any games like Clash Royale or Clash of Clans, where it's where you buy the gems that you can repeatedly buy. And for non-consumables, it can only be purchased once. So for premium apps like GoNetZero's one-time payment unlock, or like Procreate one-time unlock, the premium version. And I think the subscriptions are pretty self-explanatory. So we have auto-renewable subscriptions and non-renewing subscriptions. Oh, by the way, feel free to stop me and ask me any questions at any time. Right, so this is just a very short diagram of how in-app purchases work. So StoreKit is like a dashboard where we set everything for our app when we upload our app to the App Store. And so from the list of available in-app purchases, we need to submit them to the StoreKit. Like we want our app to have this kind of consumable purchase or this kind of non-consumable purchase. So we need to register everything in the StoreKit before we even show them in our app. And then after we have set them up with the identifier, type, price, and duration if they're subscription-based, the iOS app can just like fetch the products with the set identifier in the StoreKit. It will return the product, and the iOS app can make a payment, and it will immediately sync with server. So just to show how simple it is, I've provided a very simple code to fetch and display in-app products. So when we import StoreKit and when we have set the identifiers in our StoreKit platform, it's just a simple, maybe it's hard-coded, or maybe you have it coming from a back-end service. But with these identifiers, you can immediately do products.products for product IDs, and it will return an array of in-app purchases that is configured in your StoreKit. So let's say I'm just taking a random product, which is the first index. And you can see here product.price. It will return the decimal value of the price itself. And product display price is the string localized price based on the device locale. So for example, if we're in Singapore, it will show $10. Maybe if you're in Jakarta, then it will show 100,000 rupiah. And with this information, you can already display your products. So also just to show how simple it is to purchase a product, it literally just takes one line, which is line 20 here. It's just try await product.purchase. So what this line does is it triggers the pop-up payment. It triggers the pop-up payment, and we don't need to configure any payment options or any payment method because it's all connected to your logged in App Store account. So any payment method that is set up there will immediately show here. And so the results will return one of these three cases, which is success, user cancelled, or pending. And success itself, it contains an enum value of unverified and verified. And the first one is verified. I guess we can assume if it's successful, and if it's verified, then everything goes well, the payment went through, so we can assume that the payment is all good, and we can proceed with the granting the product entitlement or just granting anything the user bought. So for unverified here, there are a couple of cases where it can return success but unverified. The first example can be buying something from a jailbroken device, for example, or if you're familiar with MITM, which is man-in-the-middle attack, or just an API attack in general, when we make a purchase, but maybe the purchase didn't go through, but someone is intercepting the network to return a successful purchase. But Apple has a detection to match the signature of the response. So if the response doesn't match the signature of the expected response, then it will return unverified. And for that case, for those cases, we can just cancel the payment and just assume that the user is doing some exploit kind of thing. User canceled is just literally when the user clicks on the X or just closes the payment pop-up. And pending is, so in Apple, they have a feature called As to Buy. It's mostly used for maybe parents monitoring their kids' purchases. So for example, I'm a kid and I have an iPad and I'm purchasing something from a game. So when the payment pops up, instead of buying it immediately, it will show As to Buy. And then let's say the parent's iPad, when I click As to Buy, it will send a notification to the parent's iPad that says, hey, your kid's device is trying to make this purchase. Do you want to confirm or not? So in my iPad, in the kid's iPad, it will return the pending status. So that's for Apple's As to Buy feature. Okay, so now I want to highlight about these two purchases, which is non-consumables and consumable purchases. So we saw this graph earlier about how in-app purchase works, and non-consumable purchases work exactly as the diagram shows it. So after we have everything configured on the App Store Connect, and we request the product identifier and just purchase the product and it will sync with the server, this is exactly how a non-consumable purchase works normally. So just to add one thing, all your purchases are saved to the Apple ID receipt, which is your logged in Apple ID in your App Store app. So I'm not sure if we can log in with another Apple ID in your iCloud account or something, but every purchase is synced to the logged in Apple ID in your App Store app. Just a short summary on non-consumable purchases. Yeah, it's saved to your logged in Apple ID. So every Apple ID has a receipt, like a history of purchases that was made using that Apple ID. And then non-consumable, since they can only be purchased once, they have permanent entitlements. So for example, if you buy remove ads, or if you buy just the premium, the one-time unlock premium version of something, it grants permanent entitlement. And the ownership status of non-consumable purchases are very easily fetched from the logged-in Apple ID. So if you're using StoreKit, we have a one-line code to fetch all the transaction history made from this specific Apple ID. And it's very reliable to get non-consumable purchases. And it works with restore purchases. So for those of you who aren't familiar with restore purchases, I initially thought restore purchases was for a refund kind of thing, but I learned differently. So when you buy something on one device with your logged-in Apple ID and you log in to another device with the same Apple ID, sometimes they don't recognize your non-consumable purchases immediately. For example, in this device, you have bought remove ads, but it doesn't show that you have bought this thing on the other device, even though you're logged into the same Apple ID. So what restore purchase does is it just refreshes your Apple ID receipt, and it will try to see if there are non-consumable purchases that have been made in this Apple ID that hasn't been registered in this device yet. So that is what actually restore purchase does. So now we are looking at the graph for consumable purchases. Now the key difference is we have a new, I guess, block there for backend services, or it can be any persistent data storage. Now, why do we need that third persistent data storage for consumable purchases? So for example, if I have bought a remove ads kind of thing, whenever you log into another device, since it can, like the single source of truth is from your Apple ID, it doesn't matter if you don't save it in the back end, if you don't save it just anywhere else, because it can be retrieved from your logged in Apple ID. But for consumable purchases, for example, even if you have the purchase history, let's say I'm playing Clash of Clans and I bought a $10 for 500 gems 3 times, and then I log into another ID and I can get the transaction history that, oh, I have bought these consumable purchases 3 times, which is $10 for 500 gems. But in the other device, I will not know whether or not I have actually granted the 1,500 diamonds or 1,500 gems owed to this person. So how do we check that is we have to have a persistent data storage to store, to store the entitlements given for each consumable purchase, right? So the first steps are the same. If we have set everything on StoreKit and we purchase, we return the product, and we have to record the purchase in our persistent data storage. Now I'm gonna refer to it as our backend service. So when we record purchase, we actually have to verify the transaction exists first in our backend storage, because like the MITM attack or API attack, they can just send a fake record purchase API. So what our backend does in verify transaction exists is our backend is calling the Apple API itself to verify whether the transaction ID exists or not. So in this record purchase API, we typically send the transaction ID of a successful consumable purchase. And then with that transaction ID of consumable purchase, the backend will verify it with the Apple server. And once the Apple server verifies that the transaction exists and is valid, then we can save it to backend. And maybe in our backend, grant the user the 500 gems for each purchase. And we record success, and the iOS app can finish the transaction. So these are the key summaries for consumable purchases. There are no entitlements associated with the Apple ID, like the gems, because even though if you log into another account, they just won't know any history or just cannot grant any new entitlements for consumable purchases. And the status of purchases cannot be reliably determined by Apple ID receipt. Same thing. And also it depends on persistent data storage, like the example I gave earlier. And it doesn't, oh, sorry, that's a typo. It doesn't work with restore purchases because there's nothing to restore because we have no entitlements and there's no product to grant the user, even though we have purchase history of consumables. And also, if you're using StoreKit, we actually cannot even get the purchase history of consumable purchases until it was recently introduced in iOS 18. But if we are all working in big companies or startups that have been supporting the previous versions of iOS, we can't just drop all the users who are still using the previous versions. So we are still limited by that. So most of iOS apps right now, we can't even get the history of consumable purchases in-app unless we have a back-end service that is calling the Apple API directly. Up until now, does anyone have any questions about non-consumables versus consumables?
Sorry, can you go back to the slide before this one?
This one?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, what happened? Because the last one is record success from B to iOS application, and then iOS application to shoot one message called finish instruction to App Store Connect.
So this finish transaction isn't necessarily to App Store Connect. Sorry, so it's just like it doesn't actually send anything. It's just like so the transaction has finally been completed after the backend has successfully sent the message that we have saved your transaction for this consumable purchase.
I see.
Yeah.
So right, is that possible to unit test the whole diagram here locally?
Locally, we do these kinds of tests, but we are mocking the back-end service with a local data persistent service because we cannot unit test like outside of the iOS app. So we are sort of mocking our back-end service with a local data persistent storage in the iOS app, like user defaults, for example. Right. Yeah.
So I suppose that App Store Connect, they do have some like a same mock environment where you actually dummy products to do.
Oh, yeah. So if we want to do local testing with in-app purchases, we can just like replace this App Store Connect with StoreKit configuration file. So StoreKit configuration file is basically App Store Connect but local. It's just used for testing in Xcode. So in Xcode, by default they fetch from the App Store Connect for your app. But if you create a StoreKit configuration file, then you can use it to substitute the App Store Connect. So you configure all your in-app purchases in the StoreKit configuration file. So it's just like a local testing App Store Connect kind of thing. Yeah. No more questions. Okay. Right. So now I want to talk about the payment model in GoNetZero Marketplace and the challenges we've faced so far. Now, so GoNetZero Marketplace, when I explained earlier, we sell templates and planners and stickers. We started out only with a few items. So we used to sell maybe 20 or even less products in the GoNetZero Marketplace. So for each product that we sell, we used to do one non-consumable in-app purchase in the App Store Connect. So maybe 20 products, that means 20 non-consumable products in the App Store Connect. And we also used to hard-code the identifiers in our app. But then when we tried to develop the GoNetZero Marketplace even further, we eventually grew to 100 plus products. And now I guess we sort of have 3,000 plus products. And it wasn't feasible for us anymore to submit like 3,000 in-app purchases to App Store Connect because it will be rigorous work. And like submitting in-app purchases to App Store Connect, it's not like we can freely edit and manipulate the dashboard because every time we change something on the App Store Connect, we have to submit it to the App Store team and they have to review it. So we are limited by that constraint. Second, they also have a limited quantity of in-app purchases in the App Store Connect. So I don't think we can submit 3,000 in App Store Connect, even though if the work was like theoretically possible. And also because we used to hard code the identifiers for our products, that means if we want to update the products or just manipulate it somehow, we have to update the app and user has to update before they see any changes. So we needed the flexible product configuration for our 3,000 plus products. And so this is what we came up with. So now we have GoNetZero Marketplace with consumable products only. And so how it works is we just set up a few consumable purchases with like a set of prices. It's not 3, in GoNetZero it's actually a lot more, but let's say I represent them with just three prices, consumable 1, 5, 10, and $20. And a lot of the products, even 3,000 products, a lot of them have actually the same pricing and just similar pricing in general. So if we have a set of like consumable products, we don't have to submit a new in-app purchase to App Store whenever we add a new product. So every time we add a new product, we just associate them with one of the consumable in-app purchases. So it's easy for us to configure the products from back end. This product will just have this consumable 2 or consumable 3. And what I mean by we can offer dynamic product and pricing configurations. So for example, previously, each product was tied to a non-consumable purchase in the App Store Connect. So for example, if I were to change this product's price from $10 to $5, I would have to go to App Store Connect and change it manually in the App Store Connect, like submit, oh, for this identifier, I want to change the price from $10 to $5. But with this configuration, for example, I want to discount product 8. So instead of selling it for $20, I want to sell it for $10. I can just, with a single line of code, change it in the back end, change the product A to use the consumable 2. So we don't need any new configurations in the StoreKit. We can just like edit which consumable identifier to use for each product. And with this strategy, theoretically, we have no limits on product quantity because we just set any products that we want and point them to any existing consumable identifiers. In very, very rare cases where we want to have very special pricing, then maybe we have to add a new consumable purchase, but that happens very rarely because most of the time we already have at least one of those prices set up for new products. But doing this challenge solves so many of our problems, but it doesn't come without its challenges. The first thing is it needs thorough process in purchasing and granting product entitlements because like the graph earlier showed, we need our back-end services to verify the purchase and the consumable transactions. It just adds a new layer of process in purchasing. And second is dependency on back-end services because with non-consumable purchases, it's very easy for us to check whether this user has access to this product or not because we can just check their Apple ID, whether this Apple ID has purchased this non-consumable or not. But we cannot do that anymore with consumable purchases. So we are heavily depending on our back-end services, right? So and we can't use Apple ID as a single source of truth. And same thing under the web purchase history from transactions API and StoreKit until iOS 18. Up until here, any questions? Right. So maybe I'll expand a bit on like the pros and cons of using consumables. Let's say you have an app that just removes ads and you don't need an account in the app. You only need your Apple ID account in the app. When you remove ads and you log into your Apple ID account in another device, it's okay, it works. But for example, with apps that you can log in to another person's device, like Instagram, Netflix, like obviously you don't want to log in your Apple App Store account to your friend's device, but maybe you just want to log into your Netflix account. That means you have a separate account system that is not Apple ID, that is not Apple ID on the App Store. So with those kinds of purchases and services, they usually have to depend on consumable purchases, like GoodNotes Marketplace, where they purchase and they save the product to their own account services, because we cannot tie like our Netflix subscription or Netflix purchases with the Apple ID. It needs to have its own separate like account service. So that's one of the pros of using consumables, meaning that we can have our own like account service, but the cons is we can't ever use the Apple ID anymore because it's not reliable. So that concludes my sharing for my experience and challenges with the GoodNotes Marketplace. Also, we have Patrick here. Patrick is a product owner in GoodNotes Marketplace. So if you have any questions that is outside of technical knowledge, you have product questions about GoodNotes or GoodNotes Marketplace in general, Patrick can also help me answer. Okay, then if there are no questions, then maybe I want to advertise about our roles a bit. I know that it only says senior iOS engineer, lead iOS engineer, and EMs, but I hope we're not intimidated by only senior iOS engineers. Even if you're junior iOS engineers, like everyone is very welcome to apply. In fact, I applied as a senior iOS engineer, but at the time, like I only had 2 years of work experience. But in the interview, they told me, okay, you can join as a junior first, and if we like you, then we can promote you internally. But yeah, I joined as a junior iOS engineer. So even if you're not senior yet, or you don't feel like you are senior yet, you're still very welcome to apply, and the hiring team will still process your application. Thank you. Yeah, that's it for my sharing. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So